Freedom is being able to do what you want. Often we don't actually know what it is that we want. The good that I want to do, I can't do, where the evil I don't want to do, I keep on doing.
Freedom. We love it. We celebrate it. But do we really understand it? Let's talk about it with Brad Littlejohn on Steve Brown, etc.
He's an old white guy, an author, broadcaster, and seminary professor who's sick of religion. And he's brought friends. Please welcome Steve Brown, etc.
Hey, we're so glad you're here. You always have a seat at our table. We just don't let you talk. And in case you're wondering, I'm Steve, the aforementioned old white guy. Matthew Porter, who's our executive producer, is here. After many, many years, Matthew's golf game is finally consistent. It's bad all the time. And our producer, Jeremy, is in the little glass booth. I keep asking Jeremy to help me form a barbershop quartet, but he keeps saying no.
Steve, you gotta know your lane. Forget the solos and stick to the solas.
That hurts. Our one-man IT department, John Myers, is a solo guy. He's in the tech bunker. Dr. George Bingham is the president of Key Life. Yesterday was Take Your Dog to Work Day. George does that on occasion. I don't think that would work with me, though.
Mostly my wife.
Yeah, right.
Takes the dog to work.
I've got a German Shepherd who's transgender. She's all black and weighs 120 pounds. Female shepherds are smaller than that. She sounds vicious, so I don't bring her out with me very often. And Kathy Wyatt is the soft feminine side of the program. Everybody says the longest day of the year is the summer solstice, but Kathy knows the longest day is when I forget my passwords. We're going to have a great conversation today because we got a great guest. His name is Brad Littlejohn. And Brad holds a PhD from the University of Edinburgh. He's a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, as well as the founder and president emeritus of the Davenant. Am I close pronouncing
Davenant
Davenant
Institute.
Nailed it.
He did something really bad, and they made him leave, but he did find it. And Brad's new book, which I hold in my nicotine-stained fingers, is titled Call to Freedom, Retrieving Christian Liberty in an Age of License. Brad, thanks for spending this time with us. This is going to be an interesting conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And, well, listen, I think we're going to disagree because I'm into license, and and I'm not comfortable with somebody that takes that away from me. Actually, in a sense, I am. I've been reading your book this morning, and it's really good. And I love the freedom that God has given that you describe there. And we've got to get that right. But also, I got to be free to do it wrong and be loved if I don't. And if I don't, it's not real freedom. So there's a sense in which if I decide that license is the name of my game, it's possible that Jesus will still love me. And if he won't, then I'm not free. So freedom is a lot of things. Chris Christopherson said that freedom is another word for nothing left to lose. I agree with that, by the way. I don't like the downside of that, but I think he makes a good point. Okay. Now that I have expressed my antinomian tendencies, I think it would be wise for you to tell us what in the world is Christian freedom.
Sure. So I think when we talk about freedom today as modern Americans, we often instinctively, someone might define it as freedom as being able to do whatever you want, not being interfered with by other people, nobody else telling you what to do. Of course, the problem is the immediate issue with that is when we say freedom is being able to do what you want. I think all of us are aware that we don't sometimes, often we don't actually know what it is that we want. And when we do know what it is we want, sometimes we find ourselves unable to do it, not through the interference of other people alone, but through our own inner weakness, right? Paul describes this in Romans 7, the kind of internal battle that we have. He says that the good that I will want to do, I can't do, whereas the evil I don't want to do, I keep on doing. And so we're aware of this inner battle where there's a war within our own desires that is the first kind of interference with our freedom. Even if nobody else is interfering with me, I myself can be unfree if I haven't learned to master my own work impulses. And indeed, the worst impulse that we are often mastered by is the pride, the belief that I can actually be my own master. And in fact,
I agree.
The freedom that is the most fundamental and most important is in fact that freedom from self-righteousness, the freedom from pride, the freedom that says that I've got it all under control, because we don't have it under control. And that's actually a form of self-delusion. And so it's actually when we admit our own weakness, admit that we're not in control, and throw ourselves in the mercy of Christ, that we experience the deepest freedom of all, which is that freedom of knowing that our sins are forgiven, knowing that we are accepted in Christ, knowing that His Spirit is empowering us to be able to overcome that sin that is within.
I agree.
So I want to start there and make sure that when we think about freedom as Christians, we recognize it's not just freedom to be left alone, because often if you're left alone in your sin, then that's the worst slavery of all.
You know, I was kidding at the beginning, sort of, when I said I was into license, but I agreed with everything you just said. I think that often when people become Christians, they get worse pretty fast if they understand the gospel, but it doesn't last, because you begin to see that there is real freedom in obedience and not much freedom in license. And we're not in control, and the world has a tendency to remind us of that all the time, and God cooperates with that process that takes place in us. I think most Christians I know, and I know it's true of me, and it'll sound really pious and self-righteous, but I don't know anybody who wants to please God more than I do. I really do. I don't, so Romans 7 becomes my testimony too. The evil I don't want to do, I do, and the good that the good that I want to do, I can't pull off. That's an honest statement, and I think the experience of every Christian, and that's why your book is so important, is that it speaks to that very issue. So I want to be better. Can you help me?
Sure.
A proper answer is no.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody can help you.
Buy the book.
I mean, part of it is recognizing, right, that we experience. You think about a musician or an athlete that thinks that describes the feeling of freedom they have when they're able to just, the musician's able to perform some amazing melody, or the athlete can achieve some remarkable feat that none of us would be able to do. And that freedom they are able to do whatever they want, right? But that comes only after a very long period of self-discipline in which they have subjected. First of all, it comes to they submit themselves to in the case of the musician, to the instrument. They have to learn how the instrument works, and they can't just say, "Well, I want to make whatever sound I want to make." They have to learn how do I conform my actions to the structure of this thing, and then they have to learn a long process of self-discipline where you just do scales over and over, and you're very limited, and you have to do a lot of boring, tedious stuff in order to acquire that freedom to then be capable of performing at the highest level.
You're in trouble.
I know.
Aren't we all?
And it's confession time. I was kicked out of piano lessons by 3 piano teachers. And my mother is in heaven now yelling at God and saying, "It's not right. It's not right." If I had listened to Brad, who knows? I wouldn't be a preacher. I'd be a concert pianist. But I have this authority problem, and I'm going to repent during our break. But like Jesus, we're coming back, so don't go anywhere. Hey, thanks for being with us. We're talking to Brad Littlejohn, and his new book is called Call to Freedom, Retrieving Christian Liberty in an Age License. And this is a profound book, and it would be a great book for you to get at your church, for your small groups, because this needs to be discussed. We're free. We're really free. But we don't experience, when that becomes license, and Paul certainly warned about the danger of that happening. When it becomes license, it can kill you. And that is a sign of God's love. He don't want you to be killed.
Brad, before the break, we were talking about Steve's authority problem. We'll probably get that ironed out before the end of the show. But that actually does bring us to something that you have in the book where you talk about some of the paradoxes, where we're free, but we're slaves, and in my brain, is that a conflict? Talk to us about some of those paradoxes of freedom.
Yeah. So, I say if freedom is doing what you want, I mentioned one of the problems at the beginning is often we don't know what we want. We see we've all had the experience of, you log on to Netflix, you're with my wife, we're going to watch a movie. It's like, okay, what do we want to watch? I don't know. What do you want to watch? And you sit there and kind of scrolling through, looking at all the options, and there's so many options. And of course, this is kind of the world that we live in, tells us the more options you have, the more free you'll feel. But we have so many options, we don't know how to choose between them. And so then we're like, like Netflix, you tell me what to watch, and like Netflix's algorithm will say, based on what you've watched before, we think this is what you want to watch, right? So we're not nearly as self-directed as we think we are. We're always looking for someone, or something outside us to kind of steer us some way or the other. And it's fact, the freedom to truly be able to make up your own mind is something that you have to grow into and acquire. And you acquire it through a submission to authority. And this is, going back to the music lesson, right? That the the concert pianist is free to sit down at the keyboard and play, 100 different, amazing pieces of music. But the only way that they got there is by listening to, their parents who told them, you need to go to the lesson this week and next week and next week, and by following the instructions of their teacher, and by submitting to that authority who says, I know you don't want this now, but you're going to do it now. And I'm going to teach you what you should want. And through that process, then you will actually grow into the mature freedom where you're able to you have the freedom to do all kinds of things you couldn't before. And you could think about just the example of, a 5-year-old, if left themselves, they would only ever eat, like macaroni and cheese, that's it. Like if left themselves, they'd grow up and they'd be, a college student, and they'd still, I'm just eating macaroni and cheese. Or for me, it was chicken tenders. But your parent says, no, you're going to eat this, and you're going to eat this, and you're going to eat this. You're going to learn to try out these other foods. And eventually you'll discover a whole range of culinary delights that you wouldn't have if you had just been stuck in your own very narrow vision of freedom.
You're talking about the overwhelming choices. I've had that thought before of the difference between freedom and what I would call McFreedom. We're like, I want freedom, and you're like, no, what I really want is to look at the menu board at McDonald's and go, oh, A, B, or C, 1, 2, or 3. I got all the freedom in the world. I could pick this one, but I don't want. Freedom could feel like scary and overwhelming, can it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's another dimension that I talk about in the book is that we're not made for just a purely individual experience of freedom. This is one of the lies that our world tells us today, is that we experience freedom as individuals by getting away from other people. Other people get in the way of your freedom. So, be yourself, and be your own authority. Don't feel constrained by other people. You want to be authentic. But the reality is that most of us are looking for a structure within which that freedom makes sense. And you think about this, I give the example of worship, right? So I don't know, maybe you have. I've never been to a church where the worship leader just said, okay, everybody just belt out whatever song comes into your head. Just praise God as the Spirit moves you. And then, you have 100 different people singing 100 different songs, right? Well, the result would be nobody would be really singing. It would just be a cacophony, and you all be overpowering each other. So to actually have the freedom to worship God means you need to do it together. And the worship leader says, okay, we're going to sing this. All right. And we all sing it. And we don't think to ourselves, we don't think, oh, you're taking away my freedom. I would rather sing this other song. No, you might think, I didn't love the song selection today, but you recognize that you're better off singing that song selection than you would be if everybody got to make up their own mind.
But that is a choice, too, isn't it? I mean, for instance, you're talking about the paradoxes to which Matthew referred. And it's a biblical paradox, freedom and slavery. But the slavery is also chosen. It's a bondservant slavery.
Right.
And so, I might not be able to play the piano because I have an authority problem and have been kicked out by all those teachers. But maybe I don't want to play the piano. So there is an element of freedom that is real there in terms of what we choose. And once we come to Christ, there is a thing that begins to happen, which is the desire to be his bondservant, to have the whole placed in your ear and to tell people where you got it. And also, I don't believe that freedom, and this is where license is such a lie. I believe that the Scripture and God and the world are all clear that some things will kill you and some things won't. And as far as biblical revelation is concerned, some things are evil and some things are not. And there's some things that are good and some things that are really, really bad. I've done more talking than I should That's because before I came in here, I was working on that thing on freedom. I do want you to know I'm going to plagiarize you in my teaching at the Cove. No, I won't. I'll give you credit the first time. But after that, I just think you ought to know I'm going to say, as I've always said. And then, but of course, guys, the book is called To Freedom. It's a thoughtful book. It's a book to make you think. Retrieving Christian liberty in an age of license. And we all agree we live in an age of license. And it's killing us and our culture and our history and our future. So just stop it. We'll be back. Hey, thanks for joining us. We're hanging out with Brad Littlejohn. We discovered him in First Things magazine. I was blown away with an article that he wrote. Maybe one of the best things I've ever read on immigration. And then he came along and wrote this book, so we got stuck in freedom. But we're around July the 4th, so we'll talk about that as we go along. By the way, you can keep up with Brad's work. And since you're no longer there, is the website still the Institute?
Davenant Institute. Yeah, that website still has a lot of resources I was involved with, but my regular output is at bradlittlejohn.substack.com.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Brad, we were talking at the break about, some serious approaches to how one would deal with struggling with obedience and freedom and so forth, and got to the very helpful example of Bob Newhart saying, well, just stop it. And that led us to a discussion about virtue. Can you pick up on that and talk about virtue in the context of freedom?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so Steve, just saying, just stop it there at the end, it brings to mind that great segment. I think many of the listeners will be familiar with that. And of course, what makes that so funny, right? The psychiatrist who's telling the person coming in who's having, these what are thoughts of death or whatever, just stop it. What makes it so funny is that we recognize that's not how it works. When you're caught in a bad behavior, whether it's a mental health condition or just a more ordinary sinful habit, it doesn't usually work to say just stop it. We read our Bibles and we know the Bible says to stop
it.
Stop lusting, stop coveting, stop being angry. It does say just stop it in a way, and yet we keep on, as I said from Paul in Romans 7, we keep on doing these things. So why does that not work? And what more do we need? And I think what Scripture gives us is not just a just stop it, but it actually gives us guidance in what it means to grow into virtue. And this idea of virtue, it used to be how Christians often talked about righteousness, and we've often lost that language of virtue. And what they understood is that virtue is a habit, and the way habits work is we all know is it's like you're digging a groove. You go, you do a pattern of behavior once. You're not a pattern yet. You behave in a certain way once, and it's difficult the first time, but it leaves a sort of groove. So then the next time it's a little bit easier to do it, and a little bit easier to do it. And of course, the problem is we have bad habits, and we're stuck in these. We've worn these deep grooves where we just keep falling into the same bad behavior. And we can't just stop it unless we create new grooves, unless we create new habits of right behavior. And only by doing that, which again, you can think about being in a groove, maybe it doesn't feel like freedom because we think of freedom as just being able to go whichever way you want. But if you don't want to go into the bad groove that leads to destruction, then you're going to have to establish a new groove that limits your action. So you're stuck in a groove, but it's a good groove. It's a groove that leads toward life. And the way that you do that is by practices that you do not just yourself. You can establish habits yourself, but usually habits take root a lot more if you're doing them with other people. And this is why Jesus calls us to the church. The reason why we need the church is we need other people to practice good habits with, to be able to build these virtues so that we can stop sinning, which we otherwise wouldn't be able to do on our own.
Is there danger I smoke a pipe, and there's some people that are smoking Nazis. They quit and they've stopped, and they go after me all the time, and I don't even like being around them. Is there a danger? Do we have to watch self-righteousness?
Yeah, I think that's where there's a danger of legalism that can mistake. I think one of the things is that although there is the law of God, which establishes norms and rules that are some of which are universal, the law of God is quite general, and our temptation is to try to specify that law and to make very specific laws and say everyone has to do it this way, and that's what the path of righteousness looks like. And of course, the Pharisees did that, right? The Pharisees fleshed out the law of God into all these specific prescriptions, which weren't necessarily bad things to do, but the problem was to say everyone needs to do it this way, because that's not the case, because different people have different temptations, different struggles, different strengths and weaknesses. There are different points in their spiritual life. And what it looks like to follow the law of God in a broad sense might look quite different for different individuals, depending the context they're in and where they're at in their spiritual walk. And so I think we really do have to beware of that temptation to make these kind of universal norms, which we Christians sometimes do with smoking or drinking. Yes, every Christian needs to exercise moderation in those things, but moderation looks different for different people. For some people, the only way to exercise moderation is complete abstinence, but not for others.
Spurgeon was asked about smoking cigars, and he said as long as you do it in moderation, it was okay. And somebody asked him, what's moderation? He said, when you smoke 3 cigars at the same time. Hey, you guys, this is such good stuff. If you miss any of it, you're crazy. But it's hard work, so we're going to have some milk and cookies and rest up and come back. Thanks for spending this time with us. It is time well spent. By the way, if you're watching this on YouTube, would you mind hitting subscribe? As easy as it is, it really does help other folks find us. And whenever you hit subscribe, you get 3 free sins.
And most of us need it.
Yeah, we're way behind.
Brad, we've been talking a lot about freedom, and the 4th of July is coming up pretty quickly. And so I just wondered if we could go down that road a little bit. The way that we think about freedom as Americans versus the way we think about freedom as Christians. Can you just kind of open that up a little bit for us?
For sure. So, we've talked about how for our freedom as Christians means involves obedience, it involves formation in virtue, it involves disciplining our desires to pursue what is good and right, what leads the path that leads to life. Now, in the political context, though, we might say, or that's great. We maybe we want people who use their freedom to seek what is good, but it can't be the state's job. It can't be the government's job to make you a virtuous person. So we may think of political freedom, in this much more broad sense of just kind of being left alone, the law leaving you alone to do what you want to do. And but even that is a mistake, I think, in terms of how we think about political freedom. If you think about what we celebrate on July 4th, it's the Declaration of Independence, right? And what was that independence? Well, it was not actually the independence of, I think there are 3 million people living in the colonies at that time. It's not sort of a declaration of independence on behalf of 3 million individuals saying, hey, we're not under the king anymore, leave us alone. It was the independence of the 13 colonies, which wanted the freedom. What? They wanted the freedom actually to make their own laws. And it's actually interesting nobody reads past the preamble of Declaration of Independence, but if you do and read all the things they're complaining about, they complain that the Parliament was not letting the colonies make laws. So the freedom they wanted was the freedom to make law. And law, of course, is in a sense a limitation on our action. We were just talking about, the 4th of July, there are laws in some states that regulating what kind of fireworks you can set off. And some of those laws we may say are too stricter, but we do recognize in principle that's actually good, perhaps, to regulate something as dangerous as fireworks for the sake of all of us. So we use laws to limit our freedom, and yet the freedom the colonists were concerned about was the freedom to be able to be part of that lawmaking process. We are limited by laws, but the laws that we are limited by are laws that we ourselves had a say in making, right? Those laws are made by our representatives. They're not just made by some unaccountable parliament across the ocean. And so that was how early Americans thought about freedom. They understood that freedom had to be regulated by law, but the important thing was that those laws were themselves laws that we had a role in making. And I think part of the problem that we have as Americans today is in a country of 330 million people, not 3 million, 330 million, where so many laws are now made at the federal level, not the state level. There's this feeling that even if technically the laws are made by representatives in Congress that we voted for, those representatives are so far away from us, so out of touch with us, that we don't feel that we have a role in making laws. We feel like they're just being made by these unaccountable people in Washington. And I think that's why we feel this crisis of freedom today.
And I would say, but of course. So kick those people out and put somebody else in. And let power corrupt them also, too, which is our problem. The freedom, there's a positive side to freedom that your book addresses. Talk about that.
Yeah, well, I think that it relates to a lot of things we've talked about. The positive freedom that is enabled by virtue, whereby by limiting myself, by submitting to authority, by submitting to the constraints of, go back to the musical instrument analogy, submitting myself to the constraints of the piano keyboard, I then acquire this positive freedom to be able to produce all sorts of things from that keyboard. And I think that's true. We can generalize from that to all of life, where the virtuous person, the person who has learned from authority, the person who has learned self-discipline and is willing to kind of go through the tedious repetition of forming good habits, that person is then in a position to actually be their own master in a way that the person who just follows their impulses is not. The person who just follows their impulses, those impulses, as I said, they go into a rut. You follow your impulse and you do the same thing over and over, and soon you're in an addiction, right? The person who has a gambling addiction or a pornography addiction or whatever, they might have started off by saying, oh, I'm doing this because I'm free to choose what I want. And pretty soon they're not free to choose what they want. The person who's free to choose what they want is the person who refused to follow that impulse at the beginning, and who said, "I'm going to listen. I'm going to obey authority. Perhaps I'm going to do what my daddy taught me, and not follow that impulse." They're the person who, at the end of the day, is actually still free to make up their own mind. Whereas the person who thought they were making up their own mind finds that the only thing they know how to do now is keep on feeding the addiction.
You know, listening to you talk, we have the freedom. You know, this is the abundant life. This is the best way to live. I mean, this is how to sleep better, how to live better, how to enjoy life more. You know, we make religion into that which robs us of those things. And so the freedom you're talking about is the freedom to laugh and dance before the throne in a way you can't when you do your own thing. This is a great book. Are you working on another one, maybe on immigration?
No, actually, there's a chapter in the book on technology, which we didn't have time to talk about, but the new book is kind of, in some ways, an expansion of that whole chapter. How it is that our experience with digital technology is undermining our freedom to live a life of virtue.
Get that one done quickly, Brad.
Yeah,
that was going to
know.
be my original question.
And we'll look forward to talking to you again. You're a great guest. All of a sudden, I've changed my mind.
You're not going to quit smoking, are you?
No. I mean, there's some things that are sacrosanct, and that being one of them. In fact, I'm going to be buried in a casket that has been designed for me with a hump on it so I can be buried with my pipe. Brad, it's been fun having you. We're going to do it again, and we'll look forward to it. God bless you, man.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Guys, like Jesus, we're coming back, but only for a little bit to tell you who we're going to do it unto next week. So stay there.
I really.
Great hour, great discussion. You know, this could go on and on. Kathy he's writing a book on technology, and there was a chapter in the book on freedom and technology, and Kathy was going to ask that question. There are 1,000 places you can, when you start talking about freedom, sounds like a simple subject, but it's really not. And that was a good time. I really do think, though, bottom line, because this thing is about grace, whatever you do, wherever you go, no matter how much you mess it up, no matter who you hurt, no matter what you drink or what you smoke, Jesus can still love you. And in that love, there's an obedience. And then from that obedience comes a real freedom that's more than the freedom I just taught you about. In fact, I think that's the only way you get there. I think it happens when Jesus says, go where you want, and you say, if you love me that much, I'll go with you if that's okay. And when you go with him, you discover the freedom that Brad talked about for the last hour. And I think every Christian I know wants to be better. I think you really do. I mean, I really want to go with Jesus. I want to be a bondservant. I choose that because everybody, as somebody has sung, has to serve somebody. And I don't know anybody better than him. And I really want to please him. And then when he says to me, child, I'm already pleased, I go, what? He says, I'm already pleased. And when I realize that, some good things happen in my life. And that's the freedom that's worth gold. Okay, Catherine, who's going to be our guest next week?
Next week, our friend Justin Brierley is going to be back with us. He has a new book out. We really like Justin a lot. And it's got the longest subtitle. I think I said that just a couple weeks ago. I was talking about a book that had a long subtitle. I think this one's right up there. But anyway, the book is titled Why I'm Still a Christian. And the subtitle is After 2 Decades of Conversations with Skeptics and Atheists, The Reason I Believe.
Oh, yeah. That takes 2 covers.
Or Why I've Decided to Be a Buddhist. It'll be a great program. We hope you'll show. You show the same time, the same place next week. And we'll join you. Between now and then, don't do anything we wouldn't. And that gives you a wide, wide berth.